Yeah. No, it's not yours. Hey.
How much wool is on the tail, right?
Well, this is actually more hair-like.
She can do that. What? So, do your name's kind of.
Hi, I'm Shanel. I'm a recent college grad living in New Jersey. I have a physics degree, but I'm not really using that right now. But I knit, spin, and design, and for now, I'm just figuring out my life and exploring the fiber art. This is episode 22 of the Pipernell podcast. So on social media, that's why you can find me everywhere. Instagram, Ravelry is Pipernell, Pipernell. The Ravelry group for this podcast is the Pipernell podcast, where you can find like show notes, some chatter. There's a Q&A thread that's not very active. That's why after this little intro, I'm going to put in a little plug for it. Also on Facebook, I have a page called Pipernell, but so Piper and then space Nell, Pipernell with the space. Where lately I've been doing live streams of my process, like blocking, of trying out new techniques. And I also post photos, share free patterns that look cool, funny knitting related things. So if you're active on Facebook, go like that page. Yeah. And you'll have cool knitting related stuff pop up in your feed. So, and then I also now have a Patreon. I'm broke, so it didn't hurt to make one. I currently have a few patrons. They're my friends who have higher paying jobs than I do and wanted to help me out. But patron only content on that will be pretty cool. So I'll be posting kind of like the full photo sets from me shooting my FOs. I'll be doing patron-only live streams of my process. So the thing about live streams is that I'm trying out 3 separate platforms. There's Facebook Live, which I've liked the interface so far the best. There's Twitch, twitch.tv, which is probably potentially where the largest audience is for live streams, but it's kind of a fiddly setup that I have to do. And then the third one is YouTube Live, and I've done one video on that, and I think I'm going to use YouTube Live for patron-only live streams because it's easier to set privacy settings on that. But yeah, if you like this podcast, if you like my work as a designer, if you like me as a person, maybe become a patron. Yeah. Okay. So today what I got for you guys is, I got that quick question, but then I'm going to go straight into knitting stories, which is the section on projects that have a story behind it, have some personal meaning to me, or just related to some experience I've had. That is rolling into designing for this episode. I'm not going to have a separate design announcement section. And then I have a section on commission knits, and then some spinning, and then I finally have a section that's going to be on my radar. So, where I'm going to recommend a couple of podcasts, both knitting and non-knitting related. So that is going to look a little weird this episode because the FOs that I had, I no longer have in my presence. And that's because they were commissions, so I sent them off to the person who ordered them from me. So I'm going to cut between past and present Shanel. Something also that I want to kind of bring to your attention is that my pronouns are actually they and them. I know that I look like a cis woman. I'm actually a non-binary. I do still identify as a woman. That's a little complicated, but I know a lot of people look at me and think of she. So I urge you to, when you're thinking about me, if you talk about me, try to use they pronouns. It's not that hard. So Shanel is a knitter. they like using Chalgu needles, like that or something. And the reason I bring that up is because I will refer, since I'm going to be talking about myself in third person with past and present Shanel, you'll notice that I use they pronouns for myself too. Anyway, quick little announcement. Okay, so first thing, quick question, quick little Q&A. So the question of the day is, how do you store and organize your notions? Because I'm finally getting into projects where I need buttons, and so I shop for buttons, and then I have buttons. I have them in the little plastic bag that the store gave me, and they're just kind of sitting on a shelf. When I am out and about, I have this little notions box, but that's just my essentials. I have scissors, I have a tape measure, I have tapestry needles, and then I have some crap in here, like 2 tatting shuttles that I haven't touched in a while, and buttons from an old project. Those are non-essentials, but I'm not that organized of a person. Anyway, so I have this little on-the-go kit, but I don't know how to organize my notions, just at home in my apartment where they're just piling up. My needles are also in a huge pile. So yeah, in this episode thread, which is going to be posted with the show notes and everything in the Ravelry group, can you please post pictures or descriptions of your notions organization schemes, please? Because I need help with this. Yeah. And if you have, so that was a question from me to you. If you have a question for me, there is a questions thread in the Ravelry group that's been dead for a while. So if there's anything that you're curious about, would like to know about me, or my kind of experiences, what I've done in the past, anything about my knitting, then go to the questions thread and post your questions there. Yeah. All right. Next up is knitting stories. The first thing I have to talk about, I don't actually have any concrete knitting to show for it, but with my knitting group that I go to every week, I actually ran a 2 at a time sock tutorial on, was it last Tuesday already? Yeah, it was more than a week ago. Yesterday, so today is Wednesday, May 3rd, and it was the Tuesday before that, whatever the date was. And it was really fun to teach my group members how to knit socks 2 at a time. So the way it happened was at prior group meetings, I would bring sock projects that I'd always do 2 at a time, and people would look at me and be like, "Wow, can you teach me how to do that?" And I'm like, "Yeah," because I'd preach about all the benefits of doing socks 2 at a time, that I would never get second sock syndrome, because I definitely get that. And that you can make sure both socks are the same length, and you can not only apply the technique to socks, but also mittens, gloves, sleeves, anything that you need 2 of. Has anyone ever knit pants before? Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, you can knit 2 legs of pants with them. So everyone was like, "Wow, could you just do a quick tutorial on how to knit socks 2 at a time?" So what I actually came in with was, all right, y'all, I got a lesson plan. This lesson plan has a handout that you can follow along with for multiple means of representation, and it's going to be differentiated with different levels of challenge that you as a student can choose. And I was like, y'all, I am ready for this. Yeah, it's like I was used to doing this 4 or 5 times a week for 5 different lessons. So let's get to it. And so for those of you who don't know, I was a student teacher for a brief time, and I learned a lot about, lesson planning and organizing material and how to deal with a class and, teach students. So they got the right person for this 2 at a time sock tutorial. But yeah, I told everyone to bring their own sock yarn, bring a 40-inch long circular needle that was in a size appropriate for their socks. So some people brought in kind of like DK worsted weight yarn for house socks, and then some people brought in lighter sock yarn. Like one lady brought in a ball of opal or something, And one of them was actually a test knitter for my pops and pins socks. So she brought in she was going to cast on her socks 2 at a time, and right there, which was really cool. And it went well. So I decided on to teach them toe up, because I think the cast on for cuff down 2 at a time socks, while I love 2 at a time, it is kind of fiddly. So, and it involves shuffling around all those stitches, and I didn't want to confuse anyone with that and scare them off. But for toe up, I taught them Judy's Magic Cast On, which was not hard to teach. It did take a while to get through, but I think one of my strengths as a teacher is definitely recognizing when my students are being challenged at a healthy level and encouraging them to push through it. So eventually everyone got the Judy's Magic Cast On. I love that cast on, and how to knit into it. And then once they knit around into it, then they had the instructions on the handout for the toe increases, and then they were on their way. So it was really cool. It took about an hour to get everyone through to the toe increases. Some of the faster ones were on straight knitting by the time the tutorial was over. Some of them, I would say most people were still around like the middle of the toe increases. Everyone had made it past the cast on, which was great. And they got the flow of 2 at a time knitting. And I think that was something that was really helpful I had this diagram of your 2 tubes that are coming off your needle and the 4 sections of stitches that you have, and how the flow of 2 at a time knitting goes. So yeah, it was just really cool being back in like teaching mode. I don't think I'm ready to go back to teaching anytime soon, but little things like this, and maybe being a knitting instructor at a shop would be nice. I don't know. If anyone knows anyone that's hiring in New Jersey, hit me up. That was the 2 at a time sock tutorial. The next story I have is also related to socks. And I think I already did allude to it a little, but right now I'm testing my first ever sock pattern. It has gone through a lot of trials and tribulations, but it's getting there. So I'm testing the pattern for pops and pins right now. It's a slip stitch textured sock. And the thing about the pattern that I'm realizing is the way I wrote it has a lot of add-ons for more advanced sock beginners. So what I'm going to do, the basic texture is not that hard, and according to all the testers, is quite addictive. So that should be the point of the pattern. But the parts of the pattern, like the toe increases that I had written in and the heel method, were like really the refining touches on the sock that I put in the sample. And me including the instructions for those have made the pattern really challenging for beginner sock knitters. So what I think I'm going to do is when I publish a pattern, publish kind of a light version that focuses on using the texture, and it be appropriate as a second sock project when you use the toe and heel from your whatever previous project you've done. And then there's the full version where you use all of the methods that I used in the sample. So one of the techniques that I used was a toe up, gusset, and heel flap. Heel. I used those words in reverse. You're probably used to hearing heel flap and gusset, but when you do toe up, you actually hear the little mutant swatch I did. It's huge. It's a giant sock. Giant's ankle warmer or something. So when you're knitting toe up, you'll actually, come to the gusset first. The gusset increases instead of gusset decreases, and then you'll knit the heel flap up the back. And it's a flap in air quotes because it actually never flaps around. It's actually just it's a piece worked back and forth and joined to the gusset stitches as you go. So that was one thing that was definitely giving me problems during the test knit. And I am, if any of my test knitters out there are watching this, I am so, so, so grateful for every single one of you for helping me out with this pattern and bearing with all the mistakes that I have made and all the rewriting I'm doing and all the kind of little tiny mistakes and typos that a designer can make until a test knitter points it out and says, hey, do you mean this? And I'm like, oh crap, no, I didn't. Thank you so much for telling me. So yeah, thank you so much for all the feedback that you've given me so far and all the improvement that you've already helped me with for the socks. And I think there's still more to come, but it's getting there. So this heel method I'm now pretty confident in. The big pro of this, you'll notice that the heel is in a different color than the rest of the sock, in air quotes. So what I really want to get out of testing this is to perfect my contrasting heel for toe up, gusset, and flap without the usual drawbacks of trying to do a contrasting heel for toe up, gusset, flap. So I've heard that some patterns, and the one that I referenced this also did it. So before you begin the heel flap, you actually would have had to knit around across the instep, which if you're doing it in a contrasting yarn would not look good. You'd have a little stripe across the front of the foot where you don't want one. I mean, sure, that's a look that you can have, but you know, if you want to avoid it, then there should be a method for avoiding it. So it doesn't do that. This heel flap method also does not require you to cut your main color at all. You drop it, you work your heel, and then when you're done with the heel, you're right back to where you started, so you can pick up the main color right where you left it. So yeah, I am pretty confident that the instructions will work now. It does leave a little bit of a hole. That is a drawback. A lot of heel methods leave holes, so whatever method that you use to sew up the holes, like use the little ends near the hole to sew it up, that would work. I could keep playing with this and see if there's a way I could get rid of the holes. But yeah, that's progress on my little pattern and this sock mutant swatch. I wonder what it looked like on my actual foot. Yeah, no. Look at that. That's not a sock. And that's all the knitting stories I've had. The rest of my knitting is commission knitting. And that makes me think of this one question that someone asked me, and a couple of people have been kind of expressing this feeling of, oh, how do you do commission knitting? I can't motivate myself to do a project when I feel like I have to do it. And the way I answer that is, the way I pick a project with the client that's commissioning me, client, that sounds so official, doesn't it? The client that is commissioning me to make something for them, before I even order the yarn, before I get any sort of payments, we sit down and basically do a consultation. They tell me what they want. Usually it's a pretty vague idea. And then I work with them I show them a few patterns. Maybe it's like, oh, I want a triangular shawl maybe, or they saw a photo of something I had posted on social media, on my Facebook or Instagram, and they're like, wow, I really like this. Like, could you make something like it, but with like these colors or something? And so I don't like reknitting a pattern ever. So when someone asks me that because they liked something that I had already made, I'm like, okay, sure, I can make you something like it, but would you like me to, can I make a slightly different pattern? And they're totally open to it. And I kind of dazzle them with all the variety of patterns out there. And that's actually a challenge I have, not overwhelming a non-knitter commissioning me with the world of patterns out there. So I usually start with Pinterest and I'm like, okay, here are a couple pins. If you're the kind of person that is self-motivated and likes to explore by themselves, search on Pinterest for what you'd like. If you'd like a cabled scarf, all right, search on Pinterest. Here are a couple of pins to get you started. If you like that, if you like one of them, stick with it and look on Pinterest to see what's similar. If they really want to dive in, then I show them Ravelry. And that's when their mind's kind of blown. But, by the way, I am wearing a shirt under my shirt. I just realized that it looks like I'm wearing nothing underneath this open button-up shirt. I am. So yeah, that process of collaborating with them to pick out the pattern and then pick out the yarn and the colors. As I work, I'm also pretty much just, I'm designing a little, I'm investing myself in the process, and that also gets me excited about the project. So when we order the pattern and the yarn and everything, it actually feels like one of my projects, not just, oh, something I have to make for someone else. So yeah, that's how I do commission knitting. So the first two commission projects are FOs, but like I said before, I don't have them anymore. So I am going to cut to past Shanel and they'll tell you about those two projects. Thanks, future me. So this is past Shanel, however long ago this was relative to me recording in the future. This feels weird. I'm talking to you, future me. Do you hear me, future me? I don't know. Sometimes I've emailed you before, but this time I'm like talking to you. Wow. That's cool. Anyway, so I wanted to show two FOs, which are about to go in the mail because they're commissioned, so I have to get them sent off. So the first one I want to show is, well, I first folded it up very nicely. Now I'm going to unfold it. It is the Sophia shawl for my friend Maya, and it's actually for her mom. So that's why on my Ravelry page, I called it the Madre Sofia. She's not Spanish. I just thought it sounded nice. So I don't think I can even get the entire shawl on the screen. That's close enough. Isn't that pretty? It's such a pretty lace, nice and ornate, but not too ornate. It's a blend of traditional and modern looking. It's almost geometric in the way it is, but it's still very floral. And each motif has a center nup, which in the pattern, they call for beads. In that center, I decided to substitute with nups because one, I didn't have beads. Two, I think with the yarn and the bright colors, it already had enough sparkle, but it did still need that little something at the center of each motif. So I'm not going to try to pronounce the designer's name. Last time I tried and it was a disaster. So I'm just going to say it again. This is the Sophia shawl. It's a free pattern on Ravelry. Would highly recommend it. Just you need experience reading charts. And you might have to do some reading in between the lines to figure out the edge, which is just garter stitches at the edge and a single stitch framed by yarn overs in the middle. So I want to talk about the yarn. So that is Knit Pick Stroll Gradient. It's the gradient version of their sock yarn in the colorway Lion Fire. So it goes from this medium kind of burnt orange to a lighter orange and then to a very bright golden yellow. You might notice the transition between the light orange and the yellow is kind of abrupt. That's because the rows were so long by the time that I got to the yellow transition that it did fade. The orange did fade into the yellow a little, but let me see. The transition was on this side. And so by the time I got to the other side, the color had already switched to yellow and the previous row was orange, so you just have this line. But I still don't mind. I timed it with the lace pattern so that it wouldn't look too funky. It was already a transition from the normal lace motif to kind of the lace motif on steroids. So you didn't just have the center nup, you had all these edge nups around. And the pattern actually calls for 2 of these super nuppy repeats, but I realized that as I finished off the first one, I would not have enough yarn for a second one and the edge bind off. So what I did was I just stopped following the chart after the last row of that motif and kind of just made up my own edging that you can see here. Yeah. And kind of just followed the flow of the pattern. Made sure that I had the same number of decreases as yarn overs. Though in the last row, I think I actually had an extra 2 stitches because I had some extra yarn overs, but that's okay because it's the last row, and that meant that I had a couple of extra stitches to do to bind off, which would mean a stretchier, kind of more ample edge. So when I did bind off, I bound off with picots that were also not... Sorry, let me handle this shawl. It's huge. I haven't measured it. I don't want to measure it because it kind of scares me. So this picot edge, and this is the point right here. The picot edge, I placed a picot at directly below each point of the motif. But I know that it, like the centers between the motifs, that's also kind of a central point. So I placed one more picot there. So is that the difference between picots and nups? Picots are at the edge, nups are just in the center. They're both made of extra stitches, and they're both made of extra stitches that you cast on and then cast off or knit together. So I don't know. Okay. So because I had a picot here and here, I kind of like planned this out as before I bound off. And I decided that, well, I didn't want to evenly accent the 2 parts of the stitch repeat. So I stuck in kind of tertiary picots next to the one right below the point of the motif. And I really like the way it turned out. And it took so many pins, but it was so worth it, right? So yeah, that's the Sophia shawl. I think, the needles that I used for it were US size 5 or 3.75 millimeter Chowgu needles in their lace line. So nice and pointy. You need pointy tips to do nups because in this pattern it required you to purl 7 loops together. And I can't imagine doing it with duller tips. I still had to do a lot of wiggling even with the pointy lace tips. And so the other technique, I guess, that's of note in this project is that this is actually 2 balls of yarn. The Knit Picks Stroll Gradient each comes in balls, and each ball is about 460 yards. So in total, I had 900 something yards, 920-ish yards. And if I used them end to end, then I would get dark orange, orange, yellow, dark orange, orange, yellow. And I didn't want that. I wanted a single gradient. So what I did was I started them both with the dark orange end, and I alternated the skeins. So that way it drew out the color repeat and extended it for the entire length of the shawl. So I think that's a technique that I could really extend to like 3, 4, 5 balls, but it would be really cool. But working in the process, that shawl would never leave the house. Shawl, sweater, whatever, that project would never leave the house because I'd have to have all of those balls that I rotate through laid out so they don't get all tangled. Anyway, that's all I think I have to say about the Sophia shawl. This is going off to the post office in about an hour, which I didn't want to hold it for too long. I did ask her if it was okay if I kept it for a couple of days so I could talk about it, and I can't keep it for too long. All right, one more FO that I'm also going to send off in a bit. I'm just going to catch the bus to the post office, and hopefully there's not too much of a line. But I have a hat. I showed the yarn for this last episode, and it was just such a quick project, it's now an FO. This is a button hat for my friend Maddie, who commissioned her directions were a hat with buttons, and we spent some time looking through patterns on Ravelry that recommended buttons. Some ranged from just a beanie with some decorative buttons stuck on, but then when I showed her this hat with functional buttons, she really liked it. I really liked it. I want to make one of these for myself, and she decided that I should make this pattern for her. The pattern is 108 ohms by Kelly McClure. I'm going to stick with that and hope it's right. When I first read the name of the pattern, I thought she was talking about like it's 108 ohms, as in like that's the strength of an electrical resistor in a circuit. And then I read her author's notes, and no. 108 is a symbolic number in several Eastern traditions. I need to fact check that. And ohms is the sound that some people make when they meditate. Kind of sounds like she's stereotyping some Asian cultures. I'll have to fact check her. If not, then, and I doubt she watches this, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I'm holding you accountable, Kelly. Okay, so the yarn that I used is Knit Picks City Tweed DK in the colorway Jacquard, which is this blue-green. It's kind of dark. Because I have a lot of light in my room, it's showing up lighter, and it has cream and light brown flecks of tweed all throughout. And it's a cable pattern all the way around. You actually have two different cables that you alternate, and then you have this kind of big cable that's an accent. And it's really clever how she designed the cables so that they just naturally invite buttons to be there. I mean, I'm sure that's what she was going for. These buttons I sewed on with just some scrap yarn from the same one as the hat. And I actually got them from my friend Leslie, who's in my knitting group. And I don't know if you watch this, Leslie. I know I name dropped my podcast, so hi, Leslie. I hope you're watching this. So she mentioned that they were coconut shell. They're about the size of a quarter, and she brought them to the last knitting group meeting I was at so I could try them on with this button tab. So let me show you how this button works. It's a functional button tab. So after the hat was bound off, you pick up stitches for this little tab, and then you make a buttonhole. And so let me first, to finish up talking about the needles I used US 4 for the brim and US 8 for the body of the hat. I switched back to US 4 for the little tab, and that's just exactly what the pattern called for, so I'm lucky that my gauge was pretty similar to the author. Sometimes my gauge on hat patterns is way off, and I end up just knitting the whole hat, trying it on, like, crap, this is really big. And then I rip it all out, and then I have to knit it again, sizing down. So I hope that when I write up the sandbloom hat pattern, I'll recommend an appropriate needle size for most people. Anyway, back to this hat. So the idea behind this button tab is that it can button onto any one of these buttons, and each one is going to give you a different fit. So let me button it back up onto the first one. And Maddie, I don't have lice, so I'm just gonna, I've already put it on anyways. I love this hat so much. Look at it. Isn't it cute? Just that one button, and then really the tab doesn't affect the fit at all. It's just like a regular beanie. But then I'm gonna skip the second button. It's just kind of in between. I'm going to button it onto the third button, and here you see that it's now kind of made the beanie a little quirkier. The top now folds over and slouches. It's so cute, isn't it? And I'm sure you can wear it with the detail on the back. And that would look cool. advantages of podcasting on a rolly chair. Or you can, it'd probably look weird with it in the front, but let me just try it. Yeah, that looks weird. I like it. Okay. And then a friend of mine at knitting group, so I finished this at knitting group after I got the buttons. She discovered that you can fold up the brim and it sits nicely with the button. So I also really like this look. So this is the hat that there is no wrong way to wear. I want to make one for myself after I send this one off. And yeah, so that's the 2 past FOs that will be gone by the time you hear from future Shanel. So whenever they get to record, I'm going to send you back to them. Thanks, past Shanel. Okay, so now to my present projects, which are whips, because I haven't finished anything lately. Whoops. The first whip I want to show you is a shawl that I was working on last time, and last time I didn't have much of it. But here it is now. Look at that. It actually looks like a shawl. This is, oh, that's the right side. So this is Rock Island, a pattern by Jared Flood, who is Brooklyn Tweed. So it is Brooklyn Tweedy with their very strong references to kind of classic knitting traditions, but putting a modern spin on things. Isn't it so pretty? It's so pretty. Okay, that looks good. Let me spread it out all the way. It actually is a triangular shawl. It's just, the thing is, it is bottom up. So last time I only had the lace edge that's over here. And I had to knit that lace repeat over and over and over because you knit it sideways. So like, here's the lace edge, you go do 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 do. Once you had that lace edge, then you picked up a bunch of stitches for the main body, and then you work your way inward, like I am right now. So I'm pretty close to the top. Once I'm close to the top, once I'm at the top, I'll only have a few stitches, and then something apparently magical is going to happen, and that's going to close up the triangle. I'm not sure yet. I want to talk about this lace section. That was really cool. So like I said before, Brooklyn Tweed draws a lot of their inspirations from knitting traditions from around the world, but mostly focused in kind of like the British Isles, I feel like they're kind of Anglo-centric. I know, I would need to do a little more research on that. But anyway, so they're very much like knitting traditions with a contemporary spin on things. So this lace pattern that I'm trying to spread out here with my fingers is a Shetland traditional lace stitch. So because all of these stitches actually is Shetland inspired, so everything is garter based. I don't think I've purled once in this project, which is awesome. And I really love this mesh mesh with little islands that's going on here. Maybe that's why the shawl's called Rock Island. And anyway, so you probably want to know about the yarn. The yarn is Tosh Merino Light in Esoteric. I'm using about 2 skeins of it. I'm probably going to use up a little less than half of the second skein. I've already joined it, and actually what I found out is that you can felt Tosh Merino Light if you try hard enough. So I actually did the split splice when I switched skeins because I don't like wasting any yarn. The needles I'm using are Chaogu Knit Red. They have that little, why do some Chaogu needles have that bend? So it's not their pointiest tips, but for a size 7, it's pointy enough. It's size 7 or 4.5, I believe, millimeters. And I did actually have to fiddle around with some stitch markers on this, because everything's garter based. It's useful to keep a stitch marker on the right side, or if some people probably mark the wrong side instead, but to mark one of the sides so you can distinguish them. So this stitch marker used to be down here when I was working on the lace section. But now it's up here because that's where I'm going to see it when I'm working. And you see the spine forming, but before it was really distinct. So like down here where the garter section was still forming, it was really easy to just knit past the spine. So what I did was I would place a stitch marker, not on the spine stitch, but to make it easier to slip and move between rows. And so it wouldn't get caught inside the decrease. That's always annoying. Good thing I always use removable stitch markers. So I put a stitch marker 1 stitch before the decrease. And so when I'd come back around, knitting on the wrong side, I would actually, when I came to the stitch marker, I would remove it, knit one stitch, and then place the marker again, shifting it over by 1 to get ready for the next decrease. Little tip for bottom-up shawls. I really like this bottom-up construction. I want to do more shawl projects like it, or maybe design one of my own. Okay, that's it for the shawl. It's for one of my friends named Caitlin, so this is Caitlin's Rock Island shawl, and this is probably going to be an FO by the time I see you next time. The next whip is a pair of leg warmers that I actually had started during last episode, but because of last episode there was so much to talk about, I didn't talk about it. This is what I got so far. Let me put it on my lap. Let me put the yarn on my lap so I could hold the project up. So this is a pair of what are going to be fraternal leg warmers. The person who commissioned me, Heather, she was very deliberate about this. She showed me a picture of mismatched leg warmers that she really liked. It was basically, a gray and then a dark purple and dark blue, and I like that. They're stylish. I like her style. So what I'm going to do is do a gray cuff. These are going to be thigh high. So this color block section is going to go over the knees, kind of end right at the calf. And then I'm trying to decide if I should stripe the silver gray with the color, switch the colors. I could do all sorts of funky things with the rest of the, after the color block. So yeah, it's a fun project. The yarn is Lion Brand, Lion Brand Landscapes, which is 100% acrylic. The gray is silver, the blue is steel blue, and the reddish purple is Bordeaux. Yeah, which is fitting. It does look like wine. It is more purpley in real life than it was showing up on camera. But yeah, it's the yarn's honestly a little annoying to work with. It's a single ply acrylic, and I'm surprised how differently single ply acrylic behaves from single ply wool. I feel like it splits more. It's not sticky. It's very, very soft. Lion Brand makes awesome acrylic yarns, and they're very affordable. So I think for those of you who hate on acrylic for the environmental impact, that's completely valid, but also it is not the fault of the consumers who use acrylic brand to make their hobby affordable for them. It's not their fault for the environmental impact of using these materials. It's the market and the way humans have approached materials that made plastic refined from dead dinosaurs cheaper and more affordable than wool that you can shear off a sheep. So, little rant over. And yeah, this is what I got so far. I got 2 balls of the silver, and that's just what I got so far. I am, again, as you notice, doing them 2 at a time. I am going to be a 2 at a time priest and evangelicist. The 2 at a time missionary? No, that sounds dirty. But 2 at a time what? Yeah, I am the prophet of 2 at a time. She gave me measurements for her legs, like how long she wanted the leg warmers to be, how the circumference of her leg at the point where she wanted the leg warmers to stop. And then I asked her for 2 other measurements. The measurement of her thigh right above the knee and the measurements of her calves. So I'm going to kind of shape the leg warmers to those measurements. But yeah. So that's it for Heather's leg warmers. And the last project that I have are a pair of socks. So, of course, I always have to have a pair of socks. And they're for a friend of mine named Yoji. And here's what I have so far. Yeah, this is a mofo. It's mostly finished. This sock is all finished, ends woven in and everything. This sock still needs a heel. And you'll notice that it has a huge hole in it, and that's because this was my first afterthought heel. So I used the Yarn Harlots method, and I think she was recommended. Yeah, so my friend Mars of Brownberry Chronicles recommended the Yarn Harlots page for me, right? I'm sorry if I'm misquoting you, Mars. She was also one of the first results that popped up when I googled afterthought heel that didn't use waste yarn. So this was a true afterthought heel. I just knit a tube. I just knit the socks as a tube. It's stockinette on the sole, and I knit, after I knew where I'd place the heel roughly, I knit an inch more of stockinette just to give myself some wiggle room in case the heel would, just where I decided to cut the heel would be off. It's just some, like, safe area. And then I did the patterning on both sides. The pattern, I didn't really use a pattern, but I think it's similar to Hermione's everyday socks. I did like a knit 3, purl 1, and then I knit 3 rows of just straight stockinette, and then I did knit 3, purl 1, but kind of offset to make this pattern of like little bumps. Yeah, I think that's Hermione's everyday. I'm using US 1 2.25 millimeter needles. These needles are actually some aluminum DPNs that I've once picked up at a garage sale. But the main needles that I'm using are also, hey, no surprise, Chaogu, and they're knit lace line. And I'm using 40-inch circulars for these socks. I did a rounded toe. And this cute little outline here of contrast, a secondary contrast yarn. So I did a contrast toe and then a secondary contrast to outline the toe and the main color. I really like that look, because also my friend was worried about there not being enough contrast between the main color and the contrast color. But I think the contrast color goes really well. So I was like, well, I have a really contrasting yarn. What about I do an outline that really offsets that? And I think that look is really nice. So outlined contrast, heels, cuffs, and toes. On the cuff, it didn't turn out so well because it kind of got sucked into the one by one ribbing. So what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to duplicate stitch around these. I'm going to duplicate stitch over that outline under the rib, and here where I woven my ends, it actually pops a lot more. So I'm just going to I have a lot of extra of the yarn, so I'm going to take it and duplicate stitch around. I don't think I need to do it for the toe, maybe a little across this patch. And then for the heel, I actually did 2 rounds of outline color, because it was 2 rounds of knitting straight after picking up the stitches on the afterthought heel. I think it looks a lot nicer. It makes sense for the heel to have a thicker border. I think it's a nice contrast, but also still symmetry. And the thing about using 2 contrast colors is that there were so many ends to weave in. Luckily for me, I really don't mind weaving in ends once I get into the groove of it, but I really have to just sit down and do it. I can't put down the project right after if I cast off and then put down a project and said I'll weave in my ends later, I would never come back to it. I once did that, and the hat, it was a colorwork hat, so there were lots of ends. The end stayed unwoven in for 6 months, and the hat just sat on a shelf. Great job, Shanel. So yarn. Yeah. Wait, let me finish talking about this. The sock toe to cuff. Talked about the texture. So the cuff was just 1x1 ribbing, and the bind off was Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off. I've just been really into kind of a bulky looking edge for socks and cuffs lately. And I know whoever's commissioning me doesn't know and usually like won't really care, and they'll be satisfied with really any look as long as it's intentional and well done. I think, last year I was really into the interlock bind off, which is a sewn bind off that creates a really, really nice, almost invisible edge. And I just haven't been feeling sewn bind offs lately. And Jenny's surprisingly stretching bind off, JSSBO, is just a knitted bind off, which is so much easier. Just, I don't have to be pulling everywhere and stuff. Okay, so last thing about this project, the yarn. Here I have all 3 colors that I used in this sock. These 2 would be a really nice pair all on their own. Maybe a pair of like colorwork socks or something. That'd be nice. So this is the main color. This is Knit Picks Hawthorne in the colorway Lads Edition. And apparently Lads Edition is a neighborhood in Portland, I think. I was talking to Kyla of the Arctos Knits podcast about this. And she lives in the Northwest, so I think she said that. I don't know if I'm misquoting you, Kyla. I'm sorry. So this yarn is 80% Peruvian Highland wool and 20% nylon. So this thing is indestructible. In hindsight, this sounds like something that would be better for contrast toes and cuffs, toes and heels, because those are very high wear areas. But if the heels and toes get blown out, well, I'm gonna send Yoji some extra yarn to darn it up with anyways. The contrast color is Knit Pick Stroll in their color Duchess Heather, and it's this really nice, it's kind of a neutral purple. There are tones of warms and blues in there, so it's really like a complex purple that can go with a lot of things. So I think it does go really well with the grays and the purples in this color, and then the reds bring out the warmer shades in the purple and vice versa. So Stroll is 75-25 superwash merino nylon. So, I mean, it has a nylon content. It should be fine for heels and toes. And then the outline yarn, which I have plenty of, this is basically a full ball, is Cascade Heritage in some cream colorway. They number all of their colorways, so it didn't have a name, I think. And that's also 75-25 superwash merino nylon. So yeah, I think if I were to do this kind of sock again, I would use a Highland wool for the high wear areas. Highland, high wear. Just a sturdier, rougher yarn. It's not rough. It's still, it's not scratchy by any means. It's still soft. It just feels less smooth and less fluffy than a merino sock yarn. And it also knits up in a denser gauge, which I like. But I think in contrast, it's only 2-ply, while these yarns are, how many plies is it? This is 4-ply. This is also 4-ply. I mean, the extra plies definitely help strength. So, yeah, I think this combination is fine. And I don't mind blending textures of socks at all. I think it's more important. Well, I feel like this just keeps coming up. When you want to kind of break a rule of thumb, do it intentionally. So just own it. So that's all of the knitting projects that I have. So I'm going to take a short break here. I'm just about at 20 minutes. And I am, well, without the cut-in past Shanel section. And then when I'm back, I'll have spinning and on my radar. So for once, I actually have 2 spinning projects. I don't know if I've ever had more than 1 spinning project at a time on a podcast. I have had more than 1 spinning project going at a time. Never more than 2, because I'm a spindle spinner, so everything's pretty slow. And if I have multiple projects, then things go even slower. More slowly. I can grammar. Whatever! Grammar is a social construct. And changes. So the first project I want to show is this. It's on this. Well, this is what it looks like on the spindle right now. It's a lot of earth tones. You have a cream. You have a more beige here. You have browns, and then you have little teeny pops of blue-green showing up here. So that's why I'm calling this project Buried Turquoise, because if you look at the roving, it looks like you have little pops of turquoise and like a blue gem in there. So the fiber is actually from Hello Yarn. And let's see, it's from their Fiber Club, July 2015. It's extra fine merino wool top. I don't know what exactly that corresponds to in micron count. It is super soft. And their colorway, their name for it is Damp Earth. I just named my project without looking at what they had called it, and yeah, it looks like we think alike. So my bangs are splitting. Come on. Okay. I had to fix my bangs. So this fiber I actually got from my friend Dorothy. I hope if you're watching, Dorothy, hi. And thank you so much. This is just really nice to spin with. And what I did with the fiber was I actually split it in half with a friend. She has the other half, and I'd like to see what she does with it. It's going to be her first hand spun. In my half, I split it in half again, so I still have that half. It's a quarter, and then I split that half into the half of that. I split one of the quarters into fourths. And I'm basically doing fractal spinning. So this is so a fourth divided into fourths would be 16th. So right now this is 3/16 of that braid. And if I did it evenly, then basically each quarter is about an ounce. It was a 4-ounce braid. So this is 3/16 of an ounce. And I think I can fit the rest of the quarter onto the spindle. And then I plan to spin up the quarter on this same spindle, which my name for this spindle is Domino. And yeah, I'm gonna apply them together. And if I have any extra left over, I will do what I want with that. So that's spinning project 1. Spinning project 2 actually has a bit more of a story behind it. So this thing has already been traveling with me. This is more bare fiber. If you were here last time, you saw a similar finished skein that was spun on the same spindle, Bullseye. But instead of, that was Fin Sheep. This is BFL. And I'm spinning BFL top, which I bought from Misty Mountain Farm at their booth at Rhinebeck last year. And I'm spinning it on my little light spindle, so I'm really going for like a fingering sport weight here. This is a single ply. I'm just going to do a 2-ply, and this is, oh yeah, I did break the fiber off because right after this I'm going to wind it off and ply it on itself to make a little ball, and I'm going to do that with each part of the braid. So yeah, exactly the same way I spun the fin, except this project already has more of a story. So I actually started it while I was Skyping with Lorelei Lorelei Erdo of the Knits and Beads podcast, because she recently got a spindle. And so we were talking about spindle spinning, and I showed her how to start spinning, and I demonstrated starting with this BFL. And that was really fun. I hope you're doing okay, Lorelei. Then on Sunday, I took it to a spinning demonstration at a really cool place, which is near me in a town called Maplewood, New Jersey. It's the Durand Hedden House. So it's this historical house that was built in the 1700s, before the Revolutionary War, or around that time, and has since been added on to, lived in, and is now a museum of history, of architectural history. And they wanted, for like the historical purpose of stuff, I don't that was coherent, for kind of showing off the history of the area. They wanted a sheep to shawl demonstration. So they had a couple of sheep out there. I'm going to upload that separately, because I filmed an entire sheep shearing, and it was done traditionally with big scissors like shears by a woman who is in period appropriate clothing, and she was answering questions as she went, and it was just so cool. It's the thing that still sticks with me is that, I mean, the sheep are mostly chill with them getting sheared. It's just that these were yearlings, so they were a year old. It was the first time getting sheared, and one was kicking more than usual. And every time the sheep would squirm and be like, "Stop holding me down, I don't want to get a haircut." That's basically what they were like. And then you would address them exactly how you would if a teenager, was getting a haircut. You'd be like, don't do it. And come to think of it, you probably also sound enough like a mama sheep that they're like, oh crap, mom's here. Okay, I'll behave. But then they'll squirm again. So I'll upload that separately, a sheep shearing video of pretty much the entire demo. So they had sheep shearing, and then they had the next step in the process. They didn't have any fiber processing, but wait, no, they did, because so we were in the old kitchen of the house. So you had a big fireplace, you had the cauldrons, they had the stoneware out and stuff that they would have used, and we were sitting on benches. I wasn't able to get a video or photo of the room because I was so busy spinning. So we were doing a spinning demonstration, and everyone brought their travel wheels. I recently found out that there's a spinners guild in my county, and they meet once a month. So people of the spinners guild brought out their spinning wheels, their travel wheels especially. And the woman that I had gone with, we actually people were asking us how we met and how she came to bring me to that event. Basically, we bumped into each other at a coffee shop. I was hanging out at my favorite coffee shop, which I'm actually going to go to later. And I was chilling there after a therapy appointment. So I just sat down, I pulled out my knitting, and then a couple seats over from me, she was just hanging out with her husband. She pulls out some crochet, and then I just kind of slide right over. You know what you do when you see a total stranger, knitting or crocheting in public, and you're like, "Hi, stranger." So I noticed that we're both into the fiber arts. Hey. That's how we met, and that's how we hit it off. The wedding day. No, I'm kidding. And then after we talked about our knitting and crochet, then we switched over to talking about fiber art and in general and how she spins. And then I was like, I spin too. And she's like, what? I never meet anyone that spins. So that's awesome. And so I brought my spindle and I was spinning on this, and I got most of this done there. That was my first time spinning in a group setting, and it was just so fun. So that actually is going to inspire the little make-along that I'm announcing at the end of this episode, and I'll get to that later. But yeah, that's really all I can say about this BFL project so far. There's a huge story behind it. It was super fun. Got to pet cute sheepies and explore a cool house. Actually, so I mentioned we were in the old kitchen, and they had coffee for the spinning demonstrators, and that was in the new kitchen, which had been built in the 1940s. So you actually had to kind of go out the old kitchen onto the porch, and then into the new kitchen, which had been built up with like modern cabinets and the sink and plumbing and electricity and everything. And it was this shade of green that you don't see people painting their kitchens anymore. Actually, it was pretty close to this shade of green. I liked it. An entire room in it is too much, but I would like it as like an accent or something. It'd be nice. Okay, getting distracted now. So, well, I mean, it's fine for me to get distracted because now it's going to be my last section, which is just on my radar. So I have a couple of recommendations for knitting podcasts, new to me ones that I've been listening to. I'm actually going to grab my knitting if it's not going to be clicking too much. And so in addition to my usual podcast, I have a kind of a list of podcasts I usually watch, which include Kina's She's Crafty podcast. She's in Vegas, so she's from my hometown, and I love just like hearing about the like goings on of Vegas with her. Andre Student Knits, the Bakery Bear, Sock Competition. Let's see, who else have I been watching regularly? Well, of course, the Brownberry Chronicles, Sockcetera, Pin Feathers and Pearls. So those, like, in addition to my regulars, I've been adding a lot of new to me. A lot of them are not new at all to my rotation. And so the first one I want to talk about is Skandir Knits by Ellie. So Ellie and I met through VKN, virtual knit nights, which have been organized by Grace of Babel's Traveling Yarn. And she always had this stunning colorwork project on her needles. Lately she's had more like shawls and stuff, but her specialty, which she shows off on the podcast, is traditional Norwegian colorwork. And it's just so pretty. And the way she talks about her projects and the analysis of the yarns and techniques and stuff, it's like, it's my groove. And she sets herself apart from a lot of other knitting podcasts really well. She knows that she likes colorwork. She likes more rustic, sheepy yarns, which is awesome. And so I hear about a lot of yarns that I wouldn't otherwise kind of hear about from podcasts, that like their superwash merino nylon sock yarns and stuff, which are amazing. But I know I'm the type of person that really likes variety, if you can't tell with my projects. So Ellie has definitely turned me on to some sheepier yarns. And maybe that's also my spinner coming through, because it's definitely given me an appreciation for different kinds of wool. So that was Skandir Knits by Ellie. The next podcast I want to mention is... Hi, Ellie! The next podcast I want to mention is the Stranded podcast with Amy. And I've been following Amy on Instagram for a while. She dyes yarn. Her yarn's called Stranded Dye Works. And she is just so fun. She's in London. Are you in London, or Amy? And she's in Great Britain. She's in the UK. And her podcast is just so full of life, and she has so much energy. She, I can't, it's not reasonable to say someone's always happy, but she's always chipper about it. And then if she is, struggling with something at that point in her life, she is very, very open about it and just very frank. And I always appreciate that, being open about mental health and stuff. And that's really, really great to listen to. And she's around the same age as I am, so I feel like I can relate to her. And also her yarn dyeing is beautiful. And I love watching dyers' podcasts, because at the end they'll always show off their newest dyes, and then they and my favorite part is when they play around with yarn combinations, and I'm like, ooh, that's pretty. I want both of them. I want 3 of them. I want all 4 of them, or something like that. It's great for enabling, but also it gives me a chance to play with colors in my head that I don't normally get to do while online shopping. So that is the Stranded podcast by Amy. Hi, Amy. If you watch this, I don't think you do, but it's okay. It's cool just thinking of you out there, possibly watching me. And the last podcast I want to talk about, there are a bunch more, but I'll talk about them next episode since I'm going to do episodes more regularly from now on, is the Color in Life podcast with Jennifer and John Michael. So I also met them through VKN. Well, I met Jennifer. I don't think John Michael really joins her. But they are a mother and son duo, which is unusual in knitting podcasts. And they're so funny to watch interact. It's, Jennifer's being a mom to John Michael. John Michael's sometimes a goof. And he's a nerd like me. So on their most recent episode, in one of their maker projects, John Michael just pulls out this rhododecahedron. That's the right word, right? It was a rhombus combined with a dodecahedron, or something like that. And that he had built out of pencils and rubber bands. And I was like, that's totally the kind of thing that I would do. So that was really fun. And they have really fun projects and knit along ideas. They're currently doing a Dress Your Bunny cow. It's where you get a stuffed, a toy bunny, and you make clothes for them. Isn't that so cool? And I found out about them, well, I first heard about their podcast through the Dog Dare podcast. He was doing a joint cow with them. So yeah, that's the Color and Life podcast with Jennifer and John Michael. That's another thing I like that they do is that they split their videos between kind of showing off projects and chatter. I find both segments just really entertaining, but also I appreciate that they just segment it off. That way I can watch them separately, or if someone's there for just the knitting and not really for the behind the scenes chatter, then they can just tune out. So other stuff that I've been listening to, I've been listening to a lot of political podcasts. So you've probably heard of Another Round. That's by Tracy and Heaven. And they're a fun bunch. And really my thing about watching political podcasts is that there's a lot of shit going down in America right now. And hearing from podcasts from people who look like me, people of color, women of color who are also processing just the shit going down, it really helps. And they approach it with such a sense of humor that it also just really helps me cope with the stress of this country kind of falling apart. So that's been really good. Another Round, they invite guests for interviews. They recently had the woman who coined the term intersectionality, and they alternate just between like very, very important, thoughtful, deep discussions about intersectionality and race and gender with just jokes, and they're hilarious. I laugh out loud while listening to them. And oh, well, come to think of it, all 3 of these podcasts that I mentioned are run by comedians. And I really think comedians are, kind of the newscasters of the future if they stick with the facts and just present it in an entertaining but satirical way. Because they point out sometimes how ridiculous this world is. The next podcast I'm listening to is called Abe Lincoln's Top Hat. And that's 2 comedians. They're both men. I think they're both white men. I'm not sure. It's also a combination of joking around, and they're more news focused. So they will talk about recent events that week and then analyze them and riff off them. So, and then the last one is also kind of along the same lines, but it's by 2 men of color, Politically Reactive, by Hari Kondobalu and W. Kamau Bell. Oh yeah, so Abe Lincoln's Top Hat is hosted by Marcus Garvey, right? And Ben Kissel. So yeah, and then Politically Reactive, they bring in a lot more race because they're both men of color, and they are very, aware of that. So yeah, I would, if you want to keep up with political events but don't want to get kind of too depressed to do anything about it, then I would really recommend kind of like comedy political podcasts or shows or something. That's all I have for you guys today, so it's time for wrap up. I got 2 rows of this done. I'm totally ad-libbing this because I forgot to put this in my show notes. So thanks to everyone who watched. If you are a returning viewer, thank you so much for your continued support. And if this was your first time checking me out, I hope you liked it. If you made it all the way to this point, hopefully you liked some part of it that you're still here. So give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and check out the Ravelry group. Join it, ask me questions, post pictures of your stuff, what you're working on, chat with me, like my Facebook page. And the new thing to this thing of due to social media things is, if you like my podcast, if you want to support my work as an artist, as a person in general, check out my Patreon and become a patron. I have quite a few patron only content things planned, and I have a lot of rewards set up because that took me a while to think about. So check those out. If any of those appeal to you, then donate to that level. And yeah, social media. So one last thing. So this is going to be the make-along that I'm hosting from middle of May to, let's see, 2 months from now is going to be middle of July. Oh, great. And that's my birthday. So from May 16th to July 16th, which is my birthday, I am going to be hosting a spindle along. Yay, spindle along! Hashtag here on screen. So this is a make-along, a spin-along entirely dedicated to spindle spinning. If you spin on a spindle, then you post pictures. It could be a whip, anything to encourage people to get out their spindles and spin. And if you're a wheel spinner, try out maybe pull out that spindle that's been collecting dust. I'm going to open up a thread called Spindle Along. And that's going to run until July 16th, 2017. And let's see. One more. So if you are a beginner spinner, so I was also inspired since Lorelai just started spinning, Elise of the My Two Tips podcast also mentioned that she got a spindle. So I'm really inspired by these people getting into spindle spinning. And also I'm realizing that it's a pretty accessible craft. You can get a spindle and some beginner fiber for, less than $20, maybe more if you add in shipping, and depending where you are. But in that way, it's a really accessible new fiber craft. So if you're looking to diversify your fiber crafts, in addition to your entry for linking your spinning project on Ravelry, that's how you're going to enter to the thread that I'm going to post. If you mention that this is your first ever spindle spinning project, so if you're a wheel spinner spinning on a spindle for the first time, if you're spinning in general for the first time and it happens to be on a spindle, then you get a bonus entry. So yeah, that's the Spindle Along. And that's all I have for you. Again, I'm Shanel. This was the Pipernell podcast, episode 22, whatever it was titled. Oh, Singular Experiences. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye. I love you.
Okay. Steph, we're doing it. Put it over here. You want one side? Because it's all over back, right? Your jacket is there. She can do that. What? So, do yours. Just kind of
So you hold it in a different direction while you're spinning versus when you're winding it onto the spindle?
No, you go back just a little bit to get it going in that direction. You're still winding it the same.
like this. And you give it to the person who's right?
I like this.
Yeah, so yours.
Okay,
Good. And then see how
whatever you
I
like.
like this.
Purple.
See how fluffy the cloud?
What's it? Here.
want to try?
I
Ready? I'll show you.
So why is this kind of wheel good for cotton?
For whatever reason, using short fibers because it spins so fast, especially when you've got the miner's head on it.
Yeah.
It like doubles how fast you can spin.
Right. Ah, it's okay. Oh yeah, that's why they have those book chakras. Or is it?
Yes.
They spin very fast.
Yes.
You want to put it, where do you want to put it?
This is so cool.
You want to scratch his house? Okay, we'll switch it. I'll put it under this little. Okay, you're going to be switching a lot.
Okay, there was a family called Ashley Durand, Durand House.
Yep.
Really?
I should
So
bring some
I'm
babies
spinning.
if somebody can.
Yeah.
And I think Bill, I was gonna say somebody has a crossbeam.
Wow.
Is yours a crossbeam?
Oops.
My father was in the
No, it's a
army.
vein.
I didn't
Okay.
have enough
Kind of like
twist
that,
in
though, I
that
think,
one.
doesn't it?
My
I was
crossbeam.
almost gonna fall off. That would have been impressive.
Somebody had a crossbeam, but I don't.
Yeah,
maybe
it's
you
got
know,
more to the movement.
Yeah, I like that.
It may be at a workshop that somebody was sitting
I have one,
there.
I'm going to have to bring it because I've
How
never
long
been
was
able to
that?
like, make it spin right.
Oh.
So,
No, it's like, I
Let
have
me
the,
wind it
the
on the
hitchhiker,
spin
and
roll,
that's
but
what
I don't have
I
enough
could
twist
never
on
get it
it.
to work right. McDonna loves hers.
And you use a Lendrum as your
Okay.
regular one?
That's my regular one. I like my Lendrum a lot.
I spun on Lendrums, I think at a class that I took before.
Today was, in fact, the day that I cut my hair. My parents are going to be pissed. But that's okay. They live across the country from me.